Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Net podcast number 1849. I need to cross that one off. Woohoo! Historical events part 2. I hadn't planned on doing an historical event part 2, but this one kind of fell into my lap today. So, as part of my reward for getting my stuff done, I get to play in my family tree. So, as I've been talking about over the last week and a bit, we're working on DNA matches. So, those people who I have links with through Ancestry DNA, I'm going in and seeing how we are linked together. In some cases, it is very easy to find because they actually have their tree linked and it shows us who the common ancestor is. Then it's a matter of going in and proving, yes, we do have to prove it, that link is actually correct. And sometimes there's little mistakes that come up. Excuse me. Got a bit of a frog in my throat today. So yes, sometimes there are mistakes that happen and it's not that particular person we're related through, it's somebody else. You got to kind of just kick back, relax, do your research, verify your information and all of that. So today I was doing a cursory look. And when I do a cursory look, it's the first initial look of following the line. And seeing that, yes, this could possibly be the way the tree goes. And this one here is, what is she? She's a third. She's either a second or a third cousin, but we don't know how she fits into the tree. And so her and I have been chatting backwards and forwards on Messenger. We've now switched over to email, one, because it's a lot quicker. I would send a message via Ancestry and it would be a while before we got a reply because she doesn't log into Ancestry very much. I almost live in there on a daily basis. I'm a bit of a nut that way. What can I say? That's just who I am. But anyway, and so I had a PDF file to send her saying, look, this is what I found out on your tree so far. This is what I've got on my tree that has the same last name, but I can't figure out where they link. Do you have any insight on this? So she had a look at it and came back and said, well, here's some names to go on there, which were actually further down the tube, not up the top where we're trying to find the matches. And I said, and so then she actually gave me a list of last names. On her mother's side of the family, she's got the trees all worked out. So she's actually going to send me a copy of that because I said, look, if it's possible and if you agree to it, can I see your mother's side of the tree? Because maybe I come in on your mother's side of the tree and not your father's side of the tree. She doesn't know a lot on her father's side of the tree. So she said, but these are the names I'm researching. And she gave me a list of names. Half of those names I have in my family tree, but she only gave me the last names. So half of those last names I actually have in my family tree. So I figured, well, let's just start seeing where we go. And so I created a pedigree chart, and I don't know if I have any blank ones because I don't want to give you the new ones because it's got living people on it, and I don't like giving out the living people stuffs. No, hang on. Yes, I do. Oh, no, that one's filled in. Hang on. Yeah, no, that's filled in. Okay. So this one here, I've actually got them landscape, but this is this is a vertical one. But basically, it looks exactly the same as this, but it goes this way across the paper. So I have her information here, then her parents, grandparents, and then great-grandparents. So I've been filling that out at cursory looks, just seeing what other people have on their, like I've been looking at other family trees, comparing them, pulling out the information that's similar on those trees, because it's kind of likely. And then I've looked at those that have got the odd information and think, did you guys make a mistake? So I've looked at this and I go and I look at their sources. And we're talking about looking at sources yesterday to see where did they get their information from. And it's kind of interesting to see, people have copies of certificates there. That might be the birth certificate, the marriage certificate, the death certificate, yet in the tree area of Ancestry, they have completely different dates. And I'm like, you have the record right here. This one says they got married on the 11th of November, 1949. Why does your trees, there is their marriage certificate. It says they got married on the 11th of November, 1949. Yet in this person's tree, they may have like the 23rd of December, 1948. I'm like, we have a big disconnect here. So when you're researching, if you're going to load in certificates, make sure the certificates match what you have in your tree. Yes, please. And no, it wasn't for a brother or a sibling or something that they were mentioned on. It was for their actual wedding thing. So, it's little things like that that just quirk me, because it's sort of like, really, you have the official document that gives you the official date. Why do you have something different in your tree? Where did you get that date from? Yet all of the sources that you have attached to that record match what's on the certificate. Yet nothing in your sources match what dates you have. So how can all these sources say one date and then you go, nope, that's this date here? I just don't understand. There's a big disconnect there somewhere. But so anyway, so doing the cursory look, I'm going through this one tree, and I did a 4-generation pedigree chart, which takes her to her great-grandparents. I actually started with her paternal grandmother on the pedigree chart. So I have her grandmother, her great-grandparents, her second great-grandparents, and her third great-grandparents on the chart, because we put grandma here. So this will then be great, second great, third great. And this interesting date came up on the third great, on one of the third great-grandparents. Now, on the pedigree chart that I'm looking at, there are 8 great-grandparents, third great-grandparents, because I'm only starting with that one at the beginning. I'm not starting with the person involved. I'm starting with the paternal grandmother and working out both sides of that tree. So as I'm going along, I'm putting these dates in and finding these dates and all this sort of stuff. And I found this one date and I thought, I know that date. I know that date very well. It was the 3rd of February, 1931. And if you're not from New Zealand and weren't born and raised in New Zealand, you may not know what the significance of the 3rd of February, 1931 was. On the 3rd of February, 1931, there was a massive 7.8 earthquake in Napier, which basically flattened the central business district. It occurred around, I think it was like, hang on, I pulled up the information here. 10:40, around just before 10:47 a.m. in the morning. Yeah. It was, I'm trying to remember what day it was. They didn't even say what day of the week it was. But this is how it was described. On the morning of 30th, actually, I'm going to have a quick look here. 1931 calendar. Third of February was February 1931. It was a Tuesday morning. So it's a business day. Okay. So it's just, let's see, it says on the morning of 3rd of February, 1931, the air had gone still and oppressive. And if you've ever been in an area where there's an earthquake, you will know, if you've been in a few earthquakes. And in New Zealand, we have a lot of earthquakes. Some of them you feel, most of them you don't feel, but there's a website you can go to and you can see where all the earthquakes happen and how deep they were, or where they were located and all that sort of one. We feel very few of them. But whenever there's an earthquake happening, there are certain things that happen. Like everything just goes completely still. You cannot, if you've got the birds chirping, and in New Zealand you hear lots of birds chirping around. We've got lots of native birds there. Some of them have these really cool little trills and songs and all that sort of stuff. It goes dead quiet. Like you can't hear anything. There is nothing in nature moving or making a sound, because all of the animals they say creatures and animals and things can feel the earthquake coming. And so they basically run and hide and take cover. And they just go quiet. So it gets very, very still and quiet. And the sea is, they say, so on the morning of 3rd of February, 1931, the air, this is from the Napier City Council website as well that I'm reading this from, where they have the earthquake in 1931. They've got the information there about it. On the morning of 3rd of February, 1931, the air had grown still and oppressive, and the sea was so calm and still and had a most peculiar color, so much that everyone was talking about it. And that does happen. And Napier's right on the coast, right on the east coast of New Zealand. If you have a look at the map and you going up the east coast, there's that little bit that goes around. That's the Hawke's Bay area, which is where this happened. At almost 10:47 a.m., the earth heaved upwards and swayed. Energies roughly equal to the detonation of 100 million tons of TNT were channeled down a moving slab of landscape, a rupture zone, that ran directly below Napier and southwest across the Hiratangi Plains. The noise was compared to that of an express train. Then half a minute of calm and another violent shock with a downward movement and more swaying and rocking. Clouds of choking white powdery dust rose into the air from crumbled mortar and shattered concrete. 2.5 minutes after the first shock, it was over. Now, this is a Tuesday morning at 10:47 in the morning. There's going to be a lot of people around downtown doing stuff in the central business district, which has got hit the worst. Meanwhile, fires started in 2 chemist shops on Hastings Street, those of W.R. Henderson and A. Hobson. From these shops, the fire spread into adjoining buildings, and by mid-afternoon, the town was completely ablaze. The conditions were favorable for the spread of the fire in that it was a hot, fine day following a dry spell of weather. This was summertime. So New Zealand is opposite seasons to the US. So this was summer. The wind had also shifted from westerly, which is offshore, to an easterly, which sent the flames roaring up Hastings Street towards the hill. With the water supply already disrupted by the earthquake, the fire brigade was rendered virtually powerless, despite earnest attempts to bring water from the sea. Consequently, Napier's business district from Tennyson Street to Dickens Street was abandoned to the flames, which, after destroying any remaining wooden structures, left the town looking like a bomb site. So this was early in the morning. There were, and that was just describing just the first part of the earthquake, and then it talks about the aftermath and the rebuild and everything else. Now Napier is well known as the Art Deco capital. Because it was in the 1930s, everything was rebuilt in Art Deco style, including the area where they did this mass grave on where is it? They said that on the 3rd of February 1931, a 7.8 earthquake shook the whole of the Hawke's Bay. The city centres of both Napier and Hastings were destroyed. 258 people died as a result of the earthquake, most of whom were Napier citizens. The memorial records the names of the 86 of those killed and interred in this mass grave, as well as 23 buried elsewhere in the cemetery. This burial site is believed to be the largest mass grave in New Zealand. And then it's got the memorial was designed by Napier architect J.A. Lewis Hay, who's responsible for designing many of the buildings in the post-earthquake reconstruction of Napier. And why am I bringing this up? Because it turns out that the third great-grandmother of this second or third cousin that I'm got a DNA match with, that I'm trying to find out how we are linked, her third great-grandmother was actually killed on that day, and she is one of the bodies that's in that mass grave. Like I said, there was 258. They've got 86 of those people in that grave, as well as, and their names are on this memorial. And I actually sent her that information this afternoon. I said to her, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but this is what I found in my first cursory look. But it was a massive rebuild, and the New Zealand Navy came in with their ships. They brought in naval personnel. They set up, and the naval personnel got a whole bunch of stuff done. Like, they just rolled up their sleeves and just started working. They were cooking. They brought in food. They brought in water. They brought in beds. They brought in ground sheets. They brought in anything that they think they could, picks and shovels and everything else. They were doing everything from cooking to medical, to treating those that were wounded. They set up a morgue, and they were retrieving bodies out of the rubble. They just came in and did this massive amount of work. And there were other, but the Navy brought in the most people to help with that. But there were local citizens that got in and got stuck, because, of course, they're looking for loved ones that couldn't be there. There were other towns that sent people in to help and all of that. And they got everything all cleaned up. And then a few years later, Napier's rebuilt Art Deco style. And over a weekend in February, they actually have an Art Deco festival. And it is everything the 1930s. And it's a way to commemorate the fact that they had this disaster that hit them, but they survived. And they honor, though, they do have tours that are pre-earthquake. They have tours around the city that are pre-earthquake, where they get taken to areas of, this is what it was like, and they tell you the stories of what Napier looked like before the earthquake. They actually have stories. They actually have a museum set up, and you go in this museum. You get strapped in, sit in the seat. You put a seatbelt on, and they have this movie playing about the earthquake. So you get to see Napier before the earthquake. Then while the earthquake's happening, you're in the seat and you're getting shoved around like you were actually in the earthquake. It's actually quite frightening. Now, I've lived through a few earthquakes in New Zealand, but that was actually quite frightening, sitting in those chairs being jostled around like we were in an earthquake. And we were told it wasn't anywhere near the force of what the actual earthquake was, which I'm sort of like thinking, well, I hope so, because otherwise I'll have all sorts of people coming out with injuries and whiplash and goodness knows what else. But they have memorial services and that sort of thing as well for that in the Art Deco weekend that they have. Everybody gets dressed up in the 30s. They've got speakeasies that are open because there was prohibition on at the time. They've got all these vintage cars. When you go to Napier, you can actually do tours of Napier, and the drivers are dressed in the 30s, and you've got vintage cars from the 30s that they actually take you around Napier in. So they have this weekend in February. I think it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's 3 days that it goes for. And they have this big festival. There's a lot of different music from the 1930s that you get to play. You get to there's dances that you can learn. There's a whole, anything relating to the 1930s basically happens there. People come in costume dressed in the 1930s. Then they also do one now in the winter months in July, again, opposite season. So in July, they do a winter Art Deco festival. Same thing as the summer one, except for these ones are just a little more indoors, a little warmer, where it's warmer and stuff, not so much outdoors and things, but there's still all the walking tours and things that you can do as well. So yeah, to find somebody who could potentially be a relative of mine that died in that was sort of like, wow. I mean, this earthquake thing has always fascinated. It's always fascinated me, and I've been to Napier many times, and I've seen all the Art Deco, and it's just absolutely stunning with what they've done, what they did to rebuild the city, and how they got back on their feet again after the earthquake and after the devastation and everything. But just going in and learning about the history of the earthquake, and the Navy coming in with all of these, they sent, I think it was 3 ships. There was 1 ship already there in port. They sent a signal up to Devonport, which is the main naval base in New Zealand, that then sent 2 more ships down with extra supplies, extra personnel, and everything, and they just got stuck in and started helping with the cleanup and whatever needed to be done. One of the council buildings got turned into the morgue where all the bodies were put. They then had this massive burial on, what do they call it? Pacific, I think it's Pacific Island. Just trying to... what is interesting is that on Find a Grave, when I went and looked up this person on Find a Grave and found the memorial and everything there, they've got a picture that's got a close-up of where her name is on the memorial, and then they actually print out everybody's name. It's everybody's name on the memorial that even goes over the page. But I thought that they actually had... Yeah, Park Island Cemetery is where they've got this. And it says Block 21, Plot 5, Earthquake Mass Plot. And so, last night we were talking about history, and, do you have anybody in your tree that's associated with any event that happened in history? It could be natural, war, pandemics, coronations, coups, government's been overthrown. It could be any significant event in history. This was another event that was in history. It's more recent, 1931. So we're actually coming up on 100 years of that. My gosh. Yeah, in 7 years, it'll be 100 years since that happened. Wow. Wow. I never thought of that before. That just suddenly occurred to me. But take these events that happened in history. What events happened in the town, the county, the state, the country, the parish, wherever it is the district that you live in, where you live. New Zealand's a small country. We have we've We signed the Treaty of Waitangi on the 6th of February in 1840. So we're not a very old country, yet we've got a lot of history that's packed into that. This being one of them. And then, of course, there was the earthquake in Christchurch in 2011. I have not been to Christchurch since the earthquake happened in 2011. My goal is the next time I go down to New Zealand is I want to go and experience it, because one of my favorite buildings there was the cathedral that stood there in the square in Christchurch, and it wasn't actually it was one of my favorite places to bike to. We used to bike from the Air Force Base when they had an Air Force Base there. They don't have an Air Force Base there anymore. They've turned it all into housing, although some of the buildings from their base are still in existence. And the Air Force, and if you ever go down to Christchurch, you go to the Air Force Museum, the Royal New Zealand Air Force Museum. It's right at the gate of what used to, it's where it's located is just inside where the gate used to be to get onto base. And then everything sort of like past that area was runways and buildings and barracks and what was it with the tennis court? We had an indoor tennis court in the gym. Oh, in the gymnasium they did something really weird. They had like measurements for they did in the gymnasium. They had this really cool gymnasium that they built. It had a sauna in it. It had a weight room in it. And then it had the big open space that had basketball, tennis. I think it had volleyball. I can't remember the other, but it had these different colored lines all over it. And depending which sport you were playing as to which lines you would follow. And they put the measurements down, but instead of putting them in, I think the measurements were given to them in feet, and so they put them in meters. But whichever way they did it, they ended up with the tennis court being 1.5, the tennis court, the basketball court, and the volleyball court all being 1.5 times bigger than they were supposed to be. So if you think of a tennis court and where the serving line is for the serving boxes, and then you've got the baseline. The baseline was back there. You had to, we were basically playing, if you hit from the base of the serving box to the base of the serving box on the other side, that was about the size of a regulation tennis court. Yeah. We learned to hit hard, but we did have regular tennis courts outside that we would go and use. Just that if it was raining, you wanted to play a game of tennis, you'd go play in the gymnasium or something. And of course the volleyball court was bigger, the basketball court was bigger. It was just really weird. They got all the measurements screwed up, and it ended up being 1.5 times this. All of the courts that they had in there were 1.5 times bigger than they were supposed to be, which made it very interesting when you went from the indoor tennis court to the outdoor tennis court, which seemed so tiny. And all of a sudden, all these big, powerful shots that you were doing that were going from baseline to baseline inside the gymnasium were now going out on a regular tennis court. So that kind of made it a little fun. What was I talking about? I don't even know how we got onto the Air Force stuff. Oh yeah, Christchurch earthquake. So yeah, I used to be when I lived on base, I used to get on my bike and I would cycle into Hagley Park. I would go around Hagley Park. I'd walk through the botanical gardens that they had there. Sometimes I'd then carry on and cycle into the city because I love going into the square. I love going into the cathedral they had there, and there was a spire that you could climb up, and you got a really amazing view around Christchurch. That cathedral's gone. It toppled in the earthquake, which is a shame. And out at Lyttelton, which is the port for Christchurch, they had this really cool, it was a time ball. It was the time ball? And it was this little hut that had the spire on top of it. And on the spire was this ball that would drop. And I can't remember how the timing worked with it, but that got destroyed. It was such a fascinating piece of equipment to go and just watch. You couldn't cycle to that one. That one you had to go through a tunnel and everything else. So it was only if somebody had a car that would jump in there and go out to Lyttelton. And the graveyard in Lyttelton, I don't know if it's still there anymore, but the graveyard in Lyttelton is the one that they used in the movie The Frighteners that Peter Jackson made with Michael J. Fox. It got filmed in and around Christchurch. And that was the cemetery that they used. And I remember the first time we took Brad out to Lyttelton, I says, does any of that, just pointing up there, does any of that look familiar to you? And he's like, no. I said, should it? I says, yeah. I said, you've seen it in a movie. He goes, oh, no. And he'd sit there and frown at it. So you remember the movie The Frighteners, and they did all the scenes in the cemetery? He goes, yeah. I says, that's it. That's where it was. Well, up there. So, but apparently some of that slid down in the earthquake or something. I don't know. I've got to go back and have a look. and just go back, and because Christchurch was one of my favorite cities. I love Christchurch because it was nice and flat in the basin area, and then it was surrounded by hills, and I could cycle just about anywhere I wanted to go. We wanted to go, friends and I would get on our bikes and we'd go into town and go shopping. And the problem is that we then had to remember that we only had our bikes to get everything back. So we were limited in what we could buy and what we couldn't buy. And you go get stuff for your room, like blankets and soft toys and pillows and all that, and comforters and all that, because you could decorate your rooms how you wanted to, then the dorms and stuff. And so we'd go out and get stuff for our rooms. And then we had to remember, we've got to get this back to base. Let's just pare this down. Let's get this now, and then we'll come back for that later. And we got very inventive on how to put stuff on our bikes to get them back. And it was a good hour's ride on our bikes to get from the center of town back to base and that sort of thing as well. So, but it was all basically flat, except there was some little hills where you go up over a bridge and down the other side of the bridge. Those were our hills when we were riding, but basically it was flat. It's a great city for cycling around. It really was. A lot of fun and all that too. And but look at these historical things. What else happened? What happened in your area? What's some of the stuff, especially if you've got like there's one family I'm researching and they're all up in upstate New York. There's a lot of stuff that happened up there during the times that these people were up there. And so it's sort of like seeing, okay, what was the history? What historical stuff happened while they were up, in upstate New York, when some of that family would have been living there. They came across from Ireland and settled in upstate New York. So what stuff has been happening up there? And I think, no, it's not this family. It's a different branch with a DNA match that I found all this connection to New York, to upstate New York. That was upstate New York, from a family that had come over from Ireland. Yes, and a family in my tree. I'm just trying to find that connection. It's so much fun. And looking to see what historical events happened that you could make a family connect, where a family would have been living in that area during that time. Did they have any part in that? Did they get to experience it? Is there anything around there, any newspaper articles that would tell you what was going on at the time? Newspapers.com. Newspapers.com is the one that's associated with Ancestry. So if you've got a certain level of Ancestry membership, you automatically get the newspapers, but I can't remember what level of membership you've got to get. I have the Whippy-Doo, has everything. Oh, actually, no, it doesn't have everything in it. I have the All Access Pass, which is no longer All Access because they've now got these things that they've put as tools that you've got to pay extra for. And I'm sort of like, but I have All Access. Now I don't have All Access. So you've got to rename these things. So there's newspaper.com. There's also newspaperarchives.com is another one. What's the Gen? Is it Gen Bank? Genealogy Bank. I think it's Genealogy Bank. They also have old newspapers as well. In New Zealand, it's Past Papers. Just search for Past Papers, New Zealand, and it'll come up. It's all the newspapers that have been archived in New Zealand, and they're actually searchable. And a lot of them actually have been transcribed too. So you're looking at the article, and if it's a little sketchy in places, like, the ink's like kind of rubbed away, there's a button that you can click that's called text, and somebody's gone in and transcribed it. So you can see how good the transcription is. Most of them are pretty good. Like I was looking at one, I was trying to figure out what a number was, and I had a number already in the tree for, I think it was a year. It was either a day or a year I was looking for. And I already had a number in the tree. And so when I went into the tech and I looked at the actual scan piece in the newspaper article, and was going, can't get the 25th out of that. It looks like it could be something else. So I clicked over to the text, and they had there in the text the 25th. And I was like, okay then. Doesn't look like a 25 to me, but they said it is, and that's what happens out in my tree. I'm just going to... Because I knew that the people in the article were the right people. It was just the date I was looking for. It was their wedding date. And I was like, okay. But we found it. And that corroborated the primary source that we had, so that was good. So look to see what historical events are around. It could be, like I said, earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, cyclones. What's a cyclone? A cyclone is the Pacific equivalent of the Atlantic hurricanes. I think that's how it works. Yeah. if I remember correctly. So a cyclone in the Pacific Ocean is equivalent to a hurricane in the Atlantic Ocean. They get named as well. There's monsoons and all of that sort of stuff as well. You've got earthquakes, you've got volcanic eruptions, volcanoes erupting, all those sort of nature things. Then on other things, man-made things, you've got explosions, you've got wars, you've got military coups, you've got governments being overthrown, you've got coronations, you've got famous weddings and things, like a royal wedding or something like that. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on, all sorts of stuff. And in wars, you've got the world wars, you've got the different country wars are going on, you've got the ones within the countries going on, like here in the US, you've got the civil wars. There's the Mexican wars as well. Was there a Spanish one as well? The Spanish wars somewhere along the line. And then there's all the pandemics and things that have happened over the years and stuff. What has happened in your area that your ancestors may have been involved in? Were they on the sideline watching, or were they actually involved? So you could find out different things, because if they were involved, they'll be named somewhere in some official documents somewhere along the line. And so it gives you, it helps you create more of their story, so you get to understand more about the times that they lived in as well. I love history, which is why I love genealogy so much, because then if I find like a link to a family member, that event becomes more alive for me. Thinking of the Titanic, there was the, what was the other one? The Lusitania. Was it Lusitania? Lusitania. Wasn't that the one that was the medic ship or something that got blown up? I think it was the Lusitania. Did your ancestors go on cruises? You can find out if they went on cruises or stuff, because a lot of people will have their immigration papers as they come into the country, and they've just gotten off a cruise ship. I found one the other day. They left. I've got them getting on the ship in England. Oh, where were they getting on the ship? It was like in the 1950s. They were getting on the ship in England, but I don't have their arrival in the US, but I know they came back to the US. So they'd gone over there to visit family, and they came back, because I know that they still had family members in that area that they were visiting, near to where the ship was that they got on to come back to the US. So there's things like that you can find. And this all builds a story of your ancestors. I'm currently about to evaluate a really cool thing for helping you tell your story. And if it works as good as I think it's going to work, I'm going to see if we can get somebody from the company to come on and talk about it. And we'll talk about my experience using it and their idea behind it, because I think it's just absolutely brilliant what they're doing. And so I'm evaluating that right now before I bring it to you, because if it sucks, I'm not going to bring it to you. If it's really good, I'm going to come and talk about it. So anyway, that's it from us for today. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening. Go check out your family history, as in what historical events were going on at the time in the places where your ancestors were at that time. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening. And somebody wants to go for a WALK. And we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m.